and the vast tapestry of the cosmos, where 1,000 civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that even the mightiest empires refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes the smallest pebble can bring down the largest mountain. The Carathian Empire had ruled for 3 millennia, their crystalline ships cutting through space like divine judgments, their weapon platforms capable of cracking planets like eggs. They had subjugated 67 star systems, enslaved 43 species, and turned entire worlds into mining operations or agricultural colonies. To them, the galaxy was a garden to be cultivated, and they were the gardeners. But gardens sometimes grow wild things. Deep in the outer rim, on a small blue world that barely registered on their scanners, something was stirring. Something that would make the Empire question everything they thought they knew about power, about war, and about the dangerous folly of underestimating a species simply because they hadn't yet learned to travel between stars. The galaxy had tried to warn them. The ancient Zephyrians, the nomadic Veil Wanderers, even the enigmatic Silence Keepers had whispered the same message across hyperspace channels. Do not wake the humans. Do not make them angry. Do not give them a reason to look up at the stars with hostile intent. But the Carathian Empire had built its foundation on the belief that advanced technology equaled superiority, that faster-than-light travel was the true measure of civilization, that any species confined to a single world was, by definition, primitive and worthless. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they could be. This is the story of how humanity went from a curious species taking their first tentative steps into space to the galaxy's most feared force of nature. This is the story of what happens when an empire mistakes patience for weakness, scientific curiosity for naivety, and a love of peace for an inability to wage war. This is the story of humanity's rise, the empire's fall, and the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that doesn't look like a predator at all. Commander Zektar stood on the bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought Eternal Dominion, his 4 arms clasped behind his chitinous back as he gazed out at the small blue planet rotating lazily before them. The world looked peaceful, almost primitive, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans that reminded him of his homeworld before the Empire had strip-mined it for rare minerals. Preliminary scans complete, Commander, announced Science Officer Velnara, her crystalline fingers dancing across the holographic displays. The planet shows signs of a developing technological civilization. They appear to be in their early space age, having achieved basic orbital capability and primitive interplanetary exploration. Zektar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. How quaint. Another backwater world playing with chemical rockets and dreaming of the stars. He turned to his tactical officer. Any signs of faster-than-light capability? None detected, sir. Their most advanced vessels appear to be simple chemical propulsion systems. Crude, but functional for their current technological level. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's powerful engines. The Eternal Dominion was one of the Empire's newest vessels, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern and armed with enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. Its hull gleamed with the characteristic purple-black metal that marked all Carathian vessels, and its weapon arrays could target 100 different enemies simultaneously. Sir, the communications officer interrupted, we're receiving some unusual transmissions from the planet's surface. Display them, Zektar commanded. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a bewildering array of signals emanating from the planet below. Music, voices, images, data streams, a chaotic mixture of communications that painted a picture of a surprisingly complex civilization. They call themselves humans, Velnara reported, analyzing the data streams. Carbon-based, bilateral symmetry, approximately 2 meters in height. Standard mammalian physiology. They appear to have achieved global communication networks and rudimentary artificial intelligence. Zektar studied the readouts with growing interest. The planet, which the locals called Earth, was remarkably diverse. Unlike most worlds the Empire had encountered, this one showed no signs of unification under a single government or species. Instead, hundreds of different political entities coexisted across the surface, somehow managing to maintain their primitive civilization without destroying themselves. Fascinating, he murmured. They've managed to avoid the usual pattern of self-annihilation that plagues most pre-FTL species. Perhaps they're more intelligent than they appear. His tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of planetary conquests, was less impressed. They're still primitive, sir. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no gravitic manipulation. Their most advanced military technology appears to be kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. Crude but effective, Zektar acknowledged, but ultimately irrelevant. Begin standard subjugation protocols. I want a full assessment of their industrial capacity, population centers, and natural resources. We'll need to establish regional governors once we've secured the planet. As the crew began their preparations, none of them noticed the small object that had detached itself from their ship's hull during their approach to Earth. It was no larger than a grain of sand, nearly invisible against the backdrop of space, but it was broadcasting everything it observed on a frequency that no Carathian instrument could detect. On the far side of the galaxy, in a space station that existed partially outside normal three-dimensional space, an ancient being called the Curator received the transmission and felt something he hadn't experienced in millions of years: genuine concern. The Curator's species, the Primarchs, had been old when the first Carathian had learned to use fire. They had watched civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy for eons, carefully cataloging the patterns of technological development, social evolution, and the inevitable conflicts that arose when young species encountered older ones. But humans are different. The Curator had been watching them for centuries, ever since they had first developed agriculture and begun building their primitive cities. Where other species had followed predictable patterns of development, humans had consistently defied expectations. They were simultaneously capable of breathtaking cruelty and inspiring compassion, of devastating wars and unprecedented cooperation, of brilliant scientific breakthroughs and puzzling technological dead ends. Most importantly, they had a quality that the Curator had rarely seen in his extensive observations. They were unbreakable. Throughout their short history, humans had faced extinction-level events, global catastrophes, plagues, wars, and natural disasters that would have ended most civilizations. Each time, they had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more united, and more determined than before. The Curator activated his emergency communication array and began broadcasting on the ancient frequencies used by the galaxy's oldest civilizations. His message was simple but urgent. The Carathians have found Earth. The humans are about to be tested. All who value their continued existence should take note of what happens next. Back on Earth, Dr. Sarah Chun was working late in her laboratory at the International Space Monitoring Consortium when her instruments detected something impossible. The massive radio telescope array she managed had been designed to search for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. But what she was seeing now went far beyond anything she had imagined possible. "This can't be right," she muttered, double-checking her readings. The computer screens showed a massive object in high Earth orbit, something roughly the size of a small city that had somehow appeared without triggering any of the early warning systems that monitored near-Earth space. She grabbed her phone and dialed the emergency number for Space Command. "This is Dr. Chun at Arecibo. We have a situation. I'm reading a massive, unidentified object in high Earth orbit." "No, this isn't a joke." "Yes, I'm absolutely certain." Within minutes, observatories around the world were turning their instruments toward the coordinates Sarah had provided. What they saw defied explanation. A gigantic alien spacecraft, clearly artificial, clearly far beyond human technology, hanging in space like a dark omen. The ship was beautiful in a terrifying way, its hull seeming to absorb light while somehow maintaining perfect definition. Weapons arrays were clearly visible along its length, and energy readings indicated power systems that operated on principles human science couldn't begin to understand. In the United Nations building in New York, emergency sessions were being called. Military commanders around the world were attempting to assess their options while scientists tried to understand what they were facing. Religious leaders offered prayers while politicians argued about how to respond to humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. But aboard the Eternal Dominion, Commander Zektar was growing impatient. His initial scans had revealed that Earth was rich in resources the Empire needed: rare metals, organic compounds, and, most importantly, a large population that could be enslaved and put to work in the Empire's vast industrial operations. "How long until we can begin the initial bombardment?" he asked his weapons officer. "Targeting systems are online, sir. We can begin destroying military installations within the hour." Sektar nodded approvingly. The standard Imperial protocol was straightforward: demonstrate overwhelming superior firepower by destroying the planet's military capabilities, then demand immediate surrender. Species that complied quickly were usually allowed to maintain some degree of autonomy under Imperial rule. Those that resisted were enslaved or eliminated entirely. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving transmissions from the planet's surface. They appear to be attempting to establish communication." "Ignore them," Zektar commanded. "They have nothing to say that would be of interest to the Empire. Begin the demonstration bombardment. Target their largest military installations and orbital facilities." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, targeting systems locking onto military bases, naval installations, and the handful of primitive space stations the humans had managed to construct. Within minutes, the ship's primary weapons would reduce humanity's military infrastructure to radioactive dust. But as the weapons systems powered up, something unexpected happened. The human transmissions didn't stop. Instead, they intensified. And they weren't just random pleas for mercy or attempts at negotiation. They were something else entirely. "Sir," the communications officer said, his voice uncertain, "you need to hear this." Zektar was about to refuse when something in his subordinate's tone gave him pause. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was calm, professional, and speaking in surprisingly clear galactic standard, a language that should have been completely unknown to this primitive species. "Attention, Corathian vessel. This is Admiral Sarah Mitchell, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Defense Council. We are aware of your intentions and strongly advise you to reconsider your current course of action." Zektar's 4 eyes widened in shock. How could these primitives possibly know galactic standard? How do they even know the Empire's name? The voice continued. "We know you believe us to be primitive and helpless. We know your standard protocols call for a demonstration of superior firepower followed by demands for immediate surrender. We know you've done this to 43 other worlds, and we know how those encounters ended." The bridge had fallen completely silent. Every Corathian was staring at the communication display in disbelief. "What you don't know," the human voice continued, "is that we've been preparing for this moment for longer than you might think. You see, Admiral, the galaxy has been very helpful in warning us about you." Zektar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. This was impossible. These humans should know nothing about the Empire, nothing about galactic politics, nothing about the other species that the Corathians had conquered. "You're wondering how we know so much," the voice said, as if reading his thoughts. "Let me explain. 3 years ago, one of your prison ships suffered a catastrophic engine failure near our solar system. The survivors who crashed on our moon were very grateful for the medical assistance we provided. They were also quite talkative once they realized we had no intention of turning them over to their former captors." The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. No Corathian records indicated any ship losses in this sector. But if these humans were telling the truth, the Zephyrian refugees you had enslaved told us about your empire, your methods, and your complete inability to understand that technological advancement doesn't always follow predictable patterns. The Veil Wanderers you captured share their knowledge of defensive strategies that have worked against your forces before. And the Silence Keepers. The voice paused. Well, they didn't need to speak to communicate their warnings. Zektar's tactical officer was frantically checking ship records, trying to find any indication of a lost vessel. But the humans weren't finished. So we spent 3 years preparing. Not just building weapons, though we have done that, but learning about you, your weaknesses, your blind spots, and most importantly, your arrogance. The weapons systems aboard the Eternal Dominion had finished their targeting sequences and were ready to fire. But Zektar found himself hesitating. Something about this situation felt wrong, felt dangerous in a way he couldn't quite identify. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and prepare to receive our boarding parties, he finally announced, his voice carrying all the authority of 3 millennia of imperial dominance. This world is now under Carathian control. Any resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your planet. The response came immediately, but it wasn't words. It was laughter. Clear, unmistakable human laughter that filled the bridge and sent ice through the veins of every Carathian present. Admiral, the voice said when the laughter subsided, you really should have listened to those warnings. That's when Zektar noticed something that made his blood freeze. The tactical display was showing new contacts, hundreds of them, appearing throughout the solar system. Ships that had somehow remained hidden until now were suddenly visible, emerging from what appeared to be empty space. But that was impossible. These humans didn't have cloaking technology. They barely had interplanetary travel. Surprise, the human voice said cheerfully. Did you really think we spent 3 years just building bigger rockets? Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood in the command center deep beneath the Colorado Mountains, surrounded by displays showing the positions of ships throughout the solar system. 3 years of frantic preparation had led to this moment, and she felt the weight of humanity's survival resting on decisions that would be made in the next few hours. Ma'am, her tactical officer reported, all ships are in position. The Carathian vessel is holding steady in high Earth orbit, but their weapon systems are still powered up. Sarah nodded grimly. The plan they had developed was risky beyond belief, but it was their only chance. The refugees from the crashed Carathian prison ship had been very clear about the Empire's standard tactics. Overwhelming firepower followed by immediate demands for surrender. Species that resisted faced complete annihilation. But humanity had never been particularly good at following standard procedures. Status report on the Sydney array, Sarah commanded. Online and fully charged, ma'am. The Australian facility is reporting all systems green. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Sydney array was humanity's greatest achievement, a massive particle accelerator built in secret using technology reverse-engineered from the crashed prison ship and enhanced by human engineering principles that their alien teachers had insisted were impossible. The Zephyrian refugees had been particularly helpful in explaining the theoretical frameworks behind faster-than-light communication and energy manipulation. They had also been very clear about one crucial point. Their technology was designed for efficiency and elegance. Human technology, they had observed with a mixture of horror and admiration, was designed for maximum impact regardless of elegance or efficiency. Ma'am, we're getting readings from the alien vessel. They appear to be charging their primary weapons. Expected, Sarah replied. Any word from the diplomatic team? Her communications officer looked up from his console. The Carathian commander has rejected all attempts at negotiation. He's demanding immediate surrender and threatening planetary bombardment if we don't comply within the next 10 minutes. Sarah had expected as much. The crash prisoners had warned that Carathian commanders were trained never to negotiate with what they considered inferior species. They viewed any attempt at diplomacy as a sign of weakness to be exploited. But they had also revealed something else. Carathian military doctrine was based entirely on technological superiority. Their tactics, their strategies, even their psychological warfare techniques all assumed that their enemies would be fighting with inferior equipment and limited understanding of galactic military principles. They had never faced an enemy that had spent 3 years studying their methods and developing countermeasures. Signal all ships, Sarah commanded. Execute Operation Icarus. Show them what human ingenuity looks like when we're properly motivated. Across the solar system, hidden installations that have been masquerading as mining operations, research stations, and commercial facilities suddenly revealed their true nature. The asteroid belt mining platform split open like a flower, revealing a massive rail gun capable of accelerating projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. The research station orbiting Jupiter deployed what appeared to be a small sun, a fusion reactor that had been reverse-engineered from Corathian power systems and improved with human safety protocols that the original designers had apparently considered unnecessary. But the crown jewel of humanity's preparation was revealed when the moon itself seemed to unfold. The entire lunar surface had been honeycombed with tunnels and installations during 3 years of frantic construction, all hidden beneath a carefully maintained facade of normal lunar geology. Now, massive weapon arrays emerged from concealment, their targeting systems locking onto the single Corathian vessel that hung in Earth orbit like a dark threat. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Commander Zektar stared at his tactical displays in complete disbelief. Where moments before his sensors had shown a primitive world with basic space technology, he now faced what appeared to be a fully militarized solar system with weapon systems that his computers couldn't even properly classify. Analysis, he barked at his science officer. Velnara's crystalline fingers moved frantically across her displays. Sir, I'm reading energy signatures that are impossible. These humans appear to have taken our technology and somehow improved it. The power outputs I'm seeing exceed our own capabilities by orders of magnitude. That's impossible, Zektar snarled. No primitive species could understand our technology well enough to improve it. These readings must be incorrect. But even as he spoke, his tactical officer was providing confirmation of what the sensors were detecting. Sir, I'm counting over 300 distinct weapon platforms throughout this system, all of them targeting our position. And, sir, some of these energy readings are beyond our ability to defend against. Zektar felt something he hadn't experienced in his long military career: genuine fear. The Corathian Empire had built its power on the assumption that their technology was centuries ahead of any potential enemy. Their ships were designed to face multiple opponents using conventional weapons, but what he was seeing defied convention entirely. The human voice crackled over the communications system again, still maddeningly calm and professional. Commander Zektar, we're going to give you one opportunity to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy extended to someone who is about to become our prisoner. Rage flared in Zektar's 4 eyes. You dare threaten a ship of the Corathian Empire? I have enough firepower to turn your pathetic world into molten slag. Actually, the human replied conversationally, according to our calculations, you have enough firepower to damage approximately 12% of our defensive installations before we reduce your ship to component atoms. Would you like to test those calculations? To emphasize the point, every weapon system in the solar system simultaneously achieved target lock on the Eternal Dominion. The ship's threat assessment systems, designed to analyze enemy capabilities and recommend tactical responses, simply displayed an error message. The level of concentrated firepower aimed at their position exceeded the computer's ability to calculate survival odds. But Zektar was a veteran commander who had conquered worlds and enslaved entire species. He would not be intimidated by primitives, regardless of what impossible weapons they had somehow acquired. Open fire, he commanded. All batteries, full spread. Reduce this system to rubble. The Eternal Dominion unleashed the fury of the Corathian Empire. Plasma cannons that could melt mountains discharged their fury toward Earth. Particle beams capable of splitting atoms lanced toward the lunar installations. Gravitic disruptors that could tear apart molecular bonds reached out toward the human fleet. For a moment, space itself seemed to burn as energies powerful enough to sterilize worlds erupted from the Imperial dreadnought. And then humanity showed the galaxy what they had learned during 3 years of preparation. The plasma cannons, deadly beyond measure, struck defensive barriers that shouldn't have existed. Instead of simple energy shields, the humans had developed something new: layered defensive systems that use Korathian energy projection technology combined with human redundancy principles. Where a Korathian shield was designed for efficiency, human shields were designed to absorb impossible amounts of damage through multiple overlapping layers. The particle beams, capable of boring through planetary crust, found themselves deflected by gravitational fields that bent space itself. The humans had taken Korathian gravitic technology and combined it with their own understanding of physics to create defensive systems that operated on principles no Korathian engineer had considered. Most importantly, the gravitic disruptors found themselves intercepted by point defense systems that fired streams of what appeared to be simple kinetic projectiles. But these weren't ordinary bullets. They were smart ammunition, each projectile guided by its own microcomputer and capable of adjusting its trajectory to intercept incoming threats. The humans had taken the galaxy's most advanced defensive technologies and married them to the one principle that every human engineer understood instinctively: if something is worth building, it's worth overbuilding. When the energy barrage ended, the human installations remained completely intact. More embarrassing for Zektar, they hadn't even seemed to strain under the assault. The defensive systems had absorbed the full fury of an Imperial dreadnought and barely registered the attack. The human voice returned to the communication channel, and now there was a hint of amusement in its tone. "Is that all? Our simulations suggested you might be able to maintain that level of firepower for at least 30 seconds. Zektar stared at his displays in horror. His most powerful weapons had achieved absolutely nothing against these impossible defenses. Worse, his ship's power systems were now running dangerously low after the full-intensity barrage. "Impossible," he whispered. "Nothing could withstand that level of firepower." "Commander," the human voice replied, "you're thinking like someone who builds weapons to be efficient. Humans build weapons to be effective. There's a significant difference." That's when Zektar noticed something that made his situation infinitely worse. The human weapon systems hadn't fired yet. Despite having what appeared to be overwhelming superiority, they were holding their fire. "Why haven't you destroyed us?" he demanded. "Because we need to have a conversation," Admiral Mitchell replied. "And because we wanted you to understand exactly how thoroughly you've miscalculated before that conversation begins." On the moon, in a command bunker that had been carved from lunar rock and lined with materials that could withstand a direct hit from the weapons they had just deflected, Sarah Mitchell was reviewing the tactical situation with her senior staff. The demonstration had gone exactly as planned, but this was only the beginning. "All stations report successful defensive engagement," her tactical officer announced. "The Korathian vessel has expended approximately 60% of its stored energy reserves and achieved 0 damage to our installations." Sarah nodded. The plan was working, but the next phase would be much more dangerous. "Signal the fleet. Begin Phase 2. Let's show them what human offense capabilities look like." Throughout the solar system, the hidden human fleet began to reveal the true extent of their preparations. Ships that had been disguised as asteroids shed their camouflage and revealed sleek hulls that incorporated the best of Korathian technology, enhanced with human innovation. Weapon platforms that had been masquerading as communication satellites deployed armaments that no Korathian engineer would have thought possible. But the most impressive revelation came from Earth itself. The planet's major landmasses began to show energy signatures as massive installations that had been built underground came online. These weren't just weapon systems. They were manufacturing facilities that had been producing ships, weapons, and defensive systems around the clock for 3 years. The crashed Korathian prisoners had inadvertently provided humanity with the greatest gift imaginable: advance warning and a complete technical manual for Imperial technology. They had also shared intelligence about Imperial tactics, weaknesses, and, most importantly, the locations of other Imperial fleets and installations throughout the galaxy. Commander Zektar, Admiral Mitchell's voice filled the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. We're going to have that conversation now. But first, there's something you need to understand about humans. The main view screen activated, showing Sarah Mitchell sitting in what was obviously a military command center. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from years of military service. But what struck Zektar most was her eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had made hard decisions and lived with the consequences. You see, she continued, your species makes the same mistake that most technologically advanced civilizations make. You assume that superior technology automatically makes you superior in all ways. You assume that because you learn to travel between stars first, you're inherently better at warfare, strategy, and survival. Zektar wanted to interrupt, to assert Imperial superiority, but something in the human's manner kept him silent. But here's what your intelligence reports missed, Sarah continued. Humans are generalists. We're adaptable. Most importantly, we learn from our enemies. When your prison ship crashed on our moon, we didn't just reverse engineer your technology. We studied your culture, your history, your psychological profiles. We learned how you think, how you fight, and, most importantly, how you lose. The display changed to show tactical readouts that made Zektar's blood run cold. The humans had detailed intelligence on Imperial fleet movements, ship capabilities, and strategic weaknesses that should have been absolutely classified. The prisoners you lost told us about the rebellion brewing in the Outer Rim territories. They told us about the resource shortages they're forcing the Empire to seek new conquests. They told us about the political instability that's making your leaders increasingly desperate for quick, decisive victories. Sarah leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. But, most importantly, they told us about your standard operating procedures. You see, Commander, humans have spent our entire history fighting other humans. We understand warfare in ways that your empire, with its overwhelming technological advantages, has forgotten. Zektar finally found his voice. You're still primitives playing with technology you don't understand. No matter what weapons you've built, you're still trapped in this system while the Empire controls hundreds of worlds. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Commander, who said anything about being trapped? Deep in the Carathian Imperial archives, historian Prime Keth Moran was having the worst day of his 3-century career. As the Empire's leading expert on xenobiological warfare patterns and primitive species analysis, he had been summoned to provide emergency consultation on what was being described as an unprecedented tactical situation. The initial reports from the Earth system had been so extraordinary that the High Command had assumed them to be the result of communication errors or possible sabotage. A single primitive world, barely capable of interplanetary travel, could not possibly have defeated a fully armed Imperial dreadnought. It was simply outside the realm of possibility. But, as more detailed reports arrived through the hyperspace communication network, it became clear that something unprecedented had occurred. Commander Zektar's vessel was not only intact, but was apparently being held captive by the very primitives it had been sent to conquer. Keth Moran's research staff had been working frantically to find any precedent for what was happening in the Sol system. 3,000 years of Imperial expansion had created a vast database of conquered species, failed civilizations, and extinct worlds. Somewhere in that data, there had to be an explanation for how a pre-FTL species could not only survive contact with Imperial forces, but apparently defeat them. Sir, his assistant, a young Carathian named Velchris, approached with a data tablet that was glowing with urgent priority markers. I found something in the ancient records. It's disturbing. Keth Moran accepted the tablet and began reviewing the information. What he saw made his forearms tremble with something approaching fear. The records went back to the very beginning of Imperial expansion, to the early days when the Carathians had first developed faster-than-light travel and begun their conquest of neighboring systems. In those early records, there were warnings, dozens of them, from species that were already extinct or had fled to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. All of them mentioned the same thing: a small blue world in an unremarkable star system where something dangerous lived. The warnings were vague, often poetic, sometimes seemingly mystical. But they all carried the same message: do not wake the humans. Do not threaten their young. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. Most disturbing of all, the warnings weren't from primitive species. They came from civilizations that had been spacefaring for millions of years, races that had mastered technologies the Empire was still trying to understand. Ancient powers that had watched the rise and fall of countless galactic civilizations. "Sir," Velchris said nervously, "there's more. I found records of 3 previous Imperial expeditions to the Sol system." Keth Moran's mandibles clicked in surprise. "That's impossible. This is the first Imperial contact with that system." "According to these records, sir, all 3 expeditions were redirected. The commanders reported that their ships experienced navigational anomalies that prevented them from reaching the system. In each case, the crews described feeling an overwhelming compulsion to abandon their mission and investigate more suitable targets elsewhere." The historians studied the records more carefully. The expeditions had taken place over a span of several centuries, each one launching toward the Sol system, and each one mysteriously changing course without any logical explanation. The commanders had all filed reports claiming that their original targets were strategically insignificant and that they had identified more valuable objectives in other systems. But now that Keth Moran was looking for patterns, he could see the truth. Something had been protecting the human homeworld, deflecting Imperial attention away from it for centuries. Something powerful enough to influence the minds of trained Imperial commanders without them realizing what was happening. "Sir, what do we do with this information?" Before Keth Moran could answer, an emergency alert flashed across every display in the archive chamber. The High Command was ordering all senior staff to report for immediate consultation. The situation in the Sol system had apparently escalated beyond anything in Imperial experience. Minutes later, Keth Moran found himself in the High Command chamber, a massive crystalline dome at the heart of the Imperial capital world. The chamber was filled with the Empire's most senior military commanders, all of whom looked distinctly uncomfortable. At the center of the room, a holographic display showed the tactical situation in the Sol system, and what Keth Moran saw defied all logic. The humans had built a fleet, not just a few ships, a massive armada that rivaled the entire Imperial Navy in size and apparent capability. More impossibly, they had done it in the 3 years since the prison ship crash, which should have been barely enough time to reverse engineer a single drive system, much less construct hundreds of vessels. Fleet Admiral Korthnix, Supreme Commander of all Imperial forces, was pacing around the display with his characteristic aggressive stride. "Explain to me," he snarled at his assembled staff, "how a primitive species builds a space fleet in 3 years when it took our ancestors 3 centuries to achieve interstellar capability." The assembled officers exchanged uncertain glances. No one wanted to be the first to admit that they had no explanation for what they were witnessing. "Sir," offered Intelligence Director Veltheri, "our initial assessment is that they must have had outside assistance. Perhaps one of the rebel factions in the Outer Rim provided them with advanced technology. That theory would require rebel forces to have technology superior to our own," Korthnix replied coldly. "Are you suggesting that our enemies have surpassed Imperial science?" Before Veltheri could respond, new data began flowing into the holographic display. The situation in the Sol system was changing rapidly, and what the intelligence feeds were showing made the assembled commanders question everything they thought they knew about galactic warfare. The humans weren't just defending their home system. They were going on the offensive. Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood in the command center of the UES Defiance, humanity's first true interstellar warship. The vessel had been constructed using a combination of reverse-engineered Carathian technology and human engineering principles, resulting in a ship that was simultaneously familiar and revolutionary. Where Carathian vessels prioritized elegant efficiency, human ships were built for durability and adaptability. The Defiance could absorb tremendous damage and continue fighting, its systems designed with the kind of redundancy that human engineers considered standard practice, but that alien species often viewed as wasteful over-engineering. Status report. Sarah commanded as the ship completed its transition to faster-than-light travel. All systems nominal, Admiral. We're maintaining formation with the rest of the fleet. ETA to target system is 6 hours. Sarah nodded approvingly. The human fleet consisted of 50 ships, each one incorporating lessons learned from studying captured Carathian technology and intelligence provided by the alien refugees. But, more importantly, each ship carried something that no Carathian vessel possessed, a crew that had grown up hearing stories about underdogs who refused to accept defeat. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving updates from command. The Carathian vessel in Earth orbit has agreed to cooperate with our interrogation teams." Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Commander Zektar hadn't had much choice in the matter. When faced with the possibility of his ship being systematically dismantled around him, he had agreed to provide detailed intelligence about Imperial fleet movements and strategic objectives. What they had learned was both encouraging and terrifying. The Carathian Empire was vast, controlling hundreds of worlds and commanding resources beyond human comprehension. But it was also overextended, facing rebellions in multiple sectors and struggling with supply lines that stretched across thousands of light years. More importantly, the Empire's military doctrine was entirely based on technological superiority and overwhelming force. They had never developed tactics for fighting an enemy that matched their technical capabilities while possessing superior strategic flexibility. "Admiral," her tactical officer announced, "we're approaching the target system. Long-range sensors are detecting the Imperial installation exactly where our intelligence indicated." Sarah studied the tactical display. The Carathian Supply Depot in the Vega system was a massive orbital facility that supported Imperial operations across 3 sectors. It was also heavily defended by automated weapon platforms and a small fleet of patrol vessels. According to traditional military thinking, attacking such a facility would require a fleet several times larger than what humanity had managed to construct. The automated defenses alone should have been sufficient to repel any assault. But human military thinking had never been particularly traditional. "Signal the fleet," Sarah commanded. "Execute Operation Prometheus. Show them what happens when humans get angry." The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Vega system and immediately began executing a battle plan that would have seemed insane to any conventional military strategist. Instead of advancing toward the Carathian installation and formation, the human ships scattered throughout the system, each one taking a seemingly random trajectory. The Carathian automated defense systems, programmed to respond to conventional fleet tactics, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to behave predictably. Instead of presenting concentrated targets, the human ships spread out over millions of cubic kilometers, making it impossible for the defense platforms to engage more than a few vessels at a time. But the real surprise came when the human ships began their attack. Instead of using the kinds of energy weapons that dominated galactic warfare, they opened fire with kinetic projectiles, bullets essentially, but bullets traveling at a significant fraction of light speed and guided by sophisticated targeting computers. The Carathian shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and particle beams, were completely ineffective against physical projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The defense platforms, built to last for centuries without maintenance, began exploding as streams of hypervelocity ammunition tore through their hull plating. More disturbing for any Carathian observers was the human tactical approach. Instead of attempting to destroy the orbital facility, They were systematically targeting specific systems, communication arrays, sensor networks, command and control centers. They were fighting like engineers who understood exactly how the installation worked and knew precisely which components to disable. Within 2 hours, the Carathian supply depot had been reduced to a powerless hulk drifting in space. The human fleet had achieved complete tactical victory without losing a single ship. But Admiral Sarah Mitchell wasn't interested in simple military victory. She was interested in sending a message that would resonate throughout the galaxy. "Open a communication channel," she ordered. "Full galactic broadcast, maximum power." Her communications officer looked uncertain. "Ma'am, broadcasting on that scale will announce our location to every Carathian installation within 50 light-years. "That's the idea," Sarah replied grimly. "It's time the Empire understood exactly what they've awakened." The message that went out across the galaxy was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications. "This is Admiral Sarah Mitchell of the United Earth Defense Force. The Carathian Empire has made the mistake of threatening humanity's home and children. This supply depot was the first Imperial installation to experience our response. It will not be the last. Any Imperial forces that withdraw from the territories of species currently under Carathian occupation will be allowed to depart peacefully. Any Imperial forces that continue to enslave, exploit, or threaten innocent populations will be hunted down and destroyed." The message paused, and when it continued, there was something in Admiral Mitchell's voice that made veteran warriors throughout the galaxy feel a chill they hadn't experienced since their species had first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back. "We are humanity. We do not forgive. We do not forget. We do not surrender. And we are coming for you." On Carathia Prime, Fleet Admiral Korthnix stared at the communication display in disbelief. The message had been transmitted with enough power to reach every corner of Imperial space, ensuring that every species under Carathian rule would hear it. Worse, it had been transmitted using Imperial communication protocols, meaning these humans understood Carathian technology well enough to hijack their own networks. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported with obvious reluctance, "we're receiving reports from the Outer Rim. Multiple rebel groups are claiming that humanity has joined their cause. Some Imperial garrisons are requesting permission to withdraw rather than face human forces." Korthnix felt something he had never experienced in his long military career: genuine fear of an enemy. The Empire had fought rebel groups before, had faced hostile alien species and rogue military commanders. But they had never faced anything like this. The humans weren't just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for principles that no Carathian could truly understand. The radical idea that all sapient species had inherent rights that couldn't be taken away by superior technology or military force. More dangerously, they were fighting with the kind of innovative tactics and adaptive strategies that came from species that had spent its entire evolutionary history competing with itself. They understood warfare not as a tool of conquest, but as a science of survival. "Sir," his aide whispered urgently, "what are your orders?" Korthnix stared at the tactical displays, showing the growing chaos throughout Imperial space. Reports were coming in of human strike forces appearing throughout the galaxy, each one using tactics that seemed impossible but achieved results that couldn't be denied. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Carathian Empire was facing an enemy that might actually be able to defeat them. "Mobilize the entire fleet," he finally commanded. "Every ship, every weapon, every resource we possess. If these humans want a war, we'll give them a war that will end their species forever." But even as he gave the order, Korthnix couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. The humans had already demonstrated that they didn't think like other species, didn't fight like other species, and didn't lose like other species. What if they didn't die like other species either? The ancient curator floated in the observation chamber of his timeless station, watching the galaxy burn with something approaching satisfaction. For millions of years, he had cataloged the rise and fall of civilizations, documenting the endless cycle of conquest and rebellion that seemed to define sapient evolution. But what he was witnessing now was unprecedented in his vast experience. Humanity had been at war with the Carathian Empire for only 6 months, but in that time they had achieved something no other species had managed in 3 millennia. They had made the Empire afraid. The tactical displays surrounding the curator showed the current state of the galactic conflict, and the data was staggering. Human forces, operating from hidden bases throughout the galaxy, had struck over 200 Imperial installations. Supply depots, communication relays, patrol bases, and even heavily fortified fortress worlds had fallen to human assault forces that appeared without warning and vanished just as quickly. But what made the human campaign truly revolutionary wasn't just their tactical success, it was their strategy. Instead of trying to hold territory or build their own empire, they were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that allowed the Carathians to maintain control over their vast domain. More importantly, they were doing it while simultaneously liberating every species the Empire had enslaved. Captain Maria Santos piloted her stealth fighter through the asteroid field surrounding the Rigel mining operation, her instruments carefully monitoring Carathian patrol patterns while her ship's adaptive camouflage systems kept her invisible to enemy sensors. The operation she was leading represented everything that made human warfare so effective and so terrifying to their enemies. The Rigel system had been strip mined by the Empire for centuries, its native population of crystalline beings enslaved and forced to work in conditions that would kill most organic species. The mining operation was protected by an orbital defense platform and a squadron of patrol ships, making it a virtually impregnable fortress according to traditional military thinking. But humans had stopped using traditional military thinking the moment they learned about the Empire's existence. Ghost Leader to all units. Maria transmitted on the encrypted quantum communication channel the human engineers had developed by combining Carathian faster-than-light communication technology with human cryptographic principles. Target positions confirmed. Begin Phase 1. Throughout the asteroid field, 50 human fighters decloaked simultaneously, their weapons already locked onto predetermined targets. But instead of attacking the mining operation directly, they began targeting something else entirely. The massive orbital mirrors that focused stellar energy into mining lasers. The Carathian defense systems, programmed to protect the mining equipment and orbital facilities, found themselves facing an attack that seemed to make no tactical sense. Why would the humans target the mirrors instead of the more obvious military installations? They got their answer 60 seconds later when the destroyed mirrors caused a cascade failure in the stellar energy collection system. Without the precisely focused starlight, the mining operations power grid began shutting down automatically to prevent catastrophic overloads. As the lights went out across the mining complex, emergency protocols activated throughout the facility. Blast doors sealed to protect critical systems. Life support switched to battery power, and, most importantly, the slave containment fields powered down to conserve energy for essential systems. The crystalline beings who had been enslaved for generations suddenly found themselves free to move through the facility, and they had spent those generations learning every detail of the installation that had been their prison. Ghost Leader to Liberation Command, Maria transmitted. The locals are loose, and they look angry. She wasn't exaggerating. The crystalline beings, freed from their containment and possessing an intimate knowledge of the mining operation's vulnerabilities, began a systematic revolt that was breathtaking in its efficiency. Critical systems that would have taken human assault teams hours to locate and destroy were eliminated within minutes by beings who had been forced to maintain them for centuries. The Carathian garrison, faced with simultaneous attacks by human forces and a slave uprising, found themselves completely overwhelmed. Their training had prepared them to fight external enemies or suppress internal rebellions, but not both simultaneously. Within 4 hours, the Rigel mining operation had been completely liberated. The Carathian forces had been captured or driven off, the enslaved population was free, and the mining equipment had been converted into industrial facilities that the crystalline beings could use to build their own ships and weapons. But, most importantly, the liberation of Rigel had been broadcast across the galaxy using the same communication hijacking techniques that humanity had used to announce their entry into the galactic conflict. Every enslaved species under Imperial rule had received the same message. Humanity was coming to help, and resistance was not only possible, but inevitable. On Corathia Prime, the emergency session of the High Command had been going on for 18 hours without a break. Fleet Admiral Korthnix looked like he had aged decades in the past few months, his usually pristine uniform wrinkled and his 4 eyes bloodshot from staring at tactical displays that brought nothing but bad news. Report, he commanded as Intelligence Director Veltheri entered the chamber with yet another data tablet full of catastrophic updates. Sir, we've lost contact with another 12 systems in the past 6 hours. The pattern is consistent. Human forces appear without warning, coordinate with local rebel groups to destroy Imperial infrastructure, then vanish before our response fleets can arrive. Korthnix studied the galactic map that dominated the center of the chamber. Red markers indicated systems that have fallen to human attacks. Yellow markers showed systems experiencing active rebellions, and green markers indicated systems still under Imperial control. The map was becoming increasingly dominated by red and yellow indicators. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence estimates suggest the humans have at most 200 ships. We have over 10,000 vessels in the Imperial Navy. How can such a small force achieve this level of strategic impact? Veltheri activated a holographic display showing human tactical patterns. Sir, they're not fighting like a conventional fleet. They operate in small groups, never more than 10 ships per engagement. They strike targets that seem militarily insignificant but have massive strategic consequences. The display showed a 3-dimensional representation of the Empire's supply network, with red markers indicating points where human attacks had disrupted the flow of resources and information. What emerged was a picture that made Korthnix's blood run cold. The humans weren't just attacking random targets. They were systematically dismantling the Empire's ability to maintain control over its territory. Every attack was precisely calculated to cause maximum disruption while requiring minimal resources to execute. They're fighting like engineers, Veltheri continued. They study our infrastructure, identify critical failure points, and eliminate them with surgical precision. It's as if they understand our systems better than we do. That's impossible, Korthnix protested. No primitive species could understand Imperial infrastructure well enough to. He stopped mid-sentence as a terrible possibility occurred to him. The prisoners, the ones from the crashed ship. What if they told the humans more than just basic technology? Veltheri's expression confirmed his worst fears. Sir, we've reviewed the intelligence those prisoners would have possessed. They were maintenance workers and low-level technicians, but they had access to detailed infrastructure maps, supply chain information, and system vulnerabilities across dozens of sectors. Korthnix felt the weight of the Empire's 3-millennium dominion pressing down on him like a physical force. The humans hadn't just reverse-engineered Imperial technology. They had received a complete education in Imperial weaknesses from beings who had spent their lives maintaining the systems that kept the Empire running. Sir, his aide interrupted nervously. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Outer Rim Fleet. Admiral Zeth Cole is requesting immediate reinforcement. Patch it through. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Admiral Zeth Cole standing on the bridge of his flagship. The normally composed commander looked haggard, and behind him, Korthnix could see damage control teams working frantically to repair his ship's systems. Sir, Zeth Cole reported, we've engaged human forces in the Procyon sector. We need to revise our tactical assumptions. Explain. Sir, they fight like nothing we've encountered before. My fleet outnumbered them 3-1. We had superior firepower and defensive capabilities. By every measure, it should have been a straightforward Imperial victory. Korth Nix waited impatiently for the Admiral to continue. They used our own tactics against us, sir. They somehow predicted our battle plan, anticipated our responses, and countered every strategy we employed. It was as if they had complete intelligence on our operational doctrines. The transmission quality began to deteriorate as Zethkol's ship moved away from the communication relay. Sir, there's something else. They weren't trying to destroy us. They were studying us, recording everything, analyzing our responses, learning how we think and fight. I believe they were using this engagement as a training exercise. The transmission cut out, leaving the High Command chamber in stunned silence. Sir, Velthuri said quietly, if they're using our own fleets as training opportunities, Korth Nix didn't need her to finish the thought. An enemy that could use Imperial forces to train their own people was an enemy that would only grow stronger with each engagement. Traditional Imperial strategy of grinding down enemy forces through superior numbers would only serve to educate human commanders about Imperial weaknesses. New orders, Korth Nix announced to the assembled staff. All fleet commanders are to avoid direct engagement with human forces unless absolutely necessary. Priority is to be given to protecting critical infrastructure and maintaining control over core systems. It was the first time in Imperial history that a strategic withdrawal had been ordered not because of losses, but because of an enemy that was too dangerous to fight. But even as he gave the order, Korth Nix knew it was already too late. The humans had achieved something no enemy of the Empire had ever managed. They had made Imperial commanders afraid to engage in battle. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of humanity's newest and most secret installation, monitoring displays that showed the progress of liberation efforts across the galaxy. As the director of xenological warfare studies, she had spent the past 6 months developing strategies that exploited not just Imperial technology weaknesses, but psychological and cultural vulnerabilities that no previous enemy had been equipped to target. Status report, she requested from her staff. Ma'am, Operation Cascade is proceeding ahead of schedule. We've established contact with rebel groups in over 300 systems, and weapon shipments are being delivered on time to 67 liberation movements. Elena nodded approvingly. The weapons being shipped to alien rebel groups weren't just reverse-engineered Imperial technology. They were human-designed systems that incorporated hard-learned lessons from centuries of human warfare, enhanced with alien science to create weapons that were specifically designed to counter Imperial advantages. Any word from the diplomatic teams? Yes, ma'am. The Zephyrian Republic has agreed to provide sanctuary for refugee populations, and the Veil Wanderers have offered to share intelligence on Imperial fleet movements in the Outer Rim. Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The galaxy's older species, the ones that had been quietly avoiding Imperial attention for millennia, were finally willing to take an active role in opposing Korathian expansion. They had been waiting for someone else to take the first step to prove that the Empire could be successfully challenged. Humanity had taken that step, and now they were finding allies in places they had never expected. Ma'am, her intelligence officer interrupted, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Chen's task force. Put it through. Admiral Lisa Chun appeared on the main display, speaking from the bridge of the UES Retribution. Behind her, Elena could see the blue-white glow of hyperspace, indicating that the ship was traveling at faster-than-light speeds. Dr. Vasquez, Admiral Chun reported, we've completed the reconnaissance of the Korathius system. The intelligence you'll want to see immediately. Elena felt her pulse quicken. The Korathius system was the heart of the Empire, home to billions of Korathians and protected by the most advanced defensive installations in the galaxy. Any intelligence about the system's vulnerabilities could be crucial to ending the war. The system's defenses are exactly as powerful as our projections indicated, Chun continued. But we've discovered something unexpected. The Korathians have been so focused on external threats that they've neglected internal security. The display changed to show detailed scans of the Korathius system's industrial infrastructure. What Elena saw made her smile in a way that would have terrified any Carathian observer. Admiral, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Yes, ma'am. If we could get a small team into the system, we can accomplish something that will end this war without firing a shot. Elena studied the tactical data more carefully. The plan that was forming in her mind was audacious beyond anything they had attempted so far. It would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and a level of risk that bordered on insanity. It was exactly the kind of plan that humans excelled at. Do it, she ordered. But, Admiral, make sure our message to the galaxy is absolutely clear. When this is over, every species in the galaxy needs to understand exactly what happens to anyone who threatens humanity's children. Chin's smile was sharp enough to cut crystal. Copy that, ma'am. Operation Homecoming is a go. Admiral Lisa Chun stood in the cargo bay of the stealth transport Whisper, watching her team make final preparations for what would either be the most successful covert operation in human history or the last mistake any of them would ever make. The ship hung motionless in the outer edge of the Carathia system, its adaptive camouflage systems rendering it invisible to the massive sensor arrays that protected the Empire's homeworld. Final equipment check, she announced to the 12-person team that would determine the fate of the Galactic War. Each member was a specialist recruited from humanity's most elite military units, but, more importantly, each had been chosen for their ability to think creatively under pressure. The plan they were about to execute had been developed by Dr. Elena Vasquez's team after months of studying captured Imperial intelligence and refugee testimonies. It was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Instead of trying to defeat the Carathian Empire through military force, they were going to convince the Empire to defeat itself. Ma'am, reported Technical Specialist Rodriguez, checking his equipment one final time, the quantum resonance disruptors are calibrated and ready. If the intelligence about Imperial communication systems is accurate, we'll have a 15-minute window before they can identify the source of the transmission. Chin nodded. 15 minutes would be more than enough time for what they needed to accomplish. The human team had spent months learning to operate captured Carathian equipment, but they had also made improvements that no Imperial engineer would have considered necessary or even possible. Remember, she addressed the entire team, we are not here to destroy anything or hurt anyone. We are here to deliver a message. But that message needs to reach every Carathian in the Empire simultaneously, and it needs to be absolutely impossible for their government to suppress or deny. The transport shuddered slightly as it began moving deeper into the Carathia system, following a trajectory that would take it through the outer asteroid fields where mining operations provided perfect cover for their approach. The ship's AI had been programmed with evasion patterns derived from captured Imperial patrol data, allowing it to avoid detection while moving toward their target. Ma'am, the pilot announced, we're approaching the insertion point. Time at target, 47 minutes. Chun activated her personal communication system and opened a channel to the human fleet waiting in nearby systems. Command, this is Homecoming Actual. We're go for final approach. Recommend all Liberation fleets move to standby positions. The response came immediately from Dr. Vasquez's command center. Copy, Homecoming Actual. All fleets are standing by. The galaxy is watching. On Carathia Prime, Fleet Admiral Korthnix was reviewing the latest disaster reports when his world changed forever. The rebels in the Outer Rim had grown bolder, striking at Imperial installations with weapons and tactics that seemed to improve with each engagement. Worse, several core worlds were reporting that their own populations were beginning to question the Empire's policies toward alien species. The humans had done something that no enemy in Imperial history had accomplished. They had made Carathians doubt the fundamental righteousness of their civilization. Sir, his aide approached with obvious reluctance. We have another situation developing. Korthnix didn't even look up from his reports. What now, sir? Our communication networks are experiencing some kind of interference. Technical teams are investigating, but they're having difficulty identifying the source. That got Korthnix's attention. The Imperial Communication Network was the most sophisticated system in the galaxy, capable of instantaneous data transmission across thousands of light years. Any interference would have to be caused by technology that matched or exceeded Imperial capabilities. Have the humans developed faster-than-light communication jamming? He demanded. Sir, it doesn't appear to be jamming exactly. The network is still functional, but there are anomalous signals being routed through the system. It's almost as if someone has hijacked our communication protocols to carry additional data. Korthnix felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. The humans had already demonstrated an alarming ability to understand and exploit Imperial technology, but if they had learned to manipulate the communication network itself. Show me, he commanded. The display screens throughout the command center flickered to life, showing the normal flow of data through the Imperial communication network. But overlaid on the standard traffic patterns were additional signals that seemed to be propagating throughout the entire system without authorization. Sir, his technical officer reported, these unauthorized signals are reaching every communication node in the Empire simultaneously. Whatever they contain, every Korathian citizen with access to the network will receive them within minutes. Cut the network, Korthnix ordered immediately. Shut down all civilian communication access until we can identify the source of the contamination. Sir, I'm trying, but the control protocols aren't responding. It's as if someone has overridden our administrative access to our own systems. That's when the screens changed, and Korthnix found himself staring at something that shattered his understanding of Imperial security. The face looking back at him from every display in the command center belonged to a human female, middle-aged, with the kind of calm authority that marked experienced military commanders. But what terrified him wasn't her appearance. It was the fact that she was broadcasting from what was obviously the Imperial Communication Control Center on Korathia Prime itself. Citizens of the Korathian Empire, Admiral Chen began, her voice carrying across every communication channel throughout Imperial space. My name is Admiral Lisa Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. I am speaking to you from the heart of your own homeworld, from the very facilities that your government has told you are impregnable. Across the galaxy, billions of Korathians stopped what they were doing to stare at their communication devices in shock. No alien had ever penetrated the defenses of Korathia Prime. The idea was simply inconceivable. I'm not here to conquer your world or harm your people, Chen continued. I am here to deliver a message that your leaders have refused to hear. The Age of Empire is over. On the command center screens, Korthnix could see tactical displays showing impossible readings. Somehow, a small human force had penetrated not just the system's defenses, but had actually reached the planet's surface and infiltrated the most secure facility on the homeworld. For 3,000 years, your empire has built its power on the belief that technological superiority gives you the right to enslave, exploit, and destroy other species. You have convinced yourselves that any civilization incapable of faster-than-light travel is inherently primitive and worthless. Chun paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made even the most fanatical Imperial loyalists feel something approaching shame. But you made a critical error in your assumptions. You assumed that technological advancement follows a single, predictable path. You assumed that because humans hadn't developed faster-than-light travel, we were incapable of developing other technologies that might surpass your own. The display changed to show footage from the liberation of Imperial installations across the galaxy. Korathian citizens watched in stunned silence as their invincible military forces were systematically outmaneuvered, outfought, and defeated by beings they had been told were primitive animals. Over the past 6 months, human forces have liberated over 400 worlds from Imperial rule. We have freed millions of enslaved beings and destroyed thousands of your military installations. We have done this not through superior numbers or more powerful weapons, but through superior understanding of the principles that govern warfare and survival. Korthnix was frantically trying to coordinate a response, but his communication systems were completely compromised. Every order he tried to give was being intercepted, and neutralized by human forces who seem to know Imperial protocols better than Imperial personnel. Citizens of Corathia, I want you to understand something that your leaders have hidden from you. Every species your empire has enslaved possessed knowledge and capabilities that could have enriched your civilization immeasurably. Instead of learning from them, you chose to dominate them. Instead of seeking cooperation, you chose conquest. The footage shifted to show liberated worlds where humans were working alongside freed alien populations to rebuild civilizations that the Empire had systematically destroyed. The images showed cooperation and mutual aid between species on a scale that Imperial propaganda had always claimed was impossible. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us to thrive, but it is not vast enough to accommodate a civilization built on the systematic oppression of others. Chen's expression hardened, and when she spoke again, every Corathian listening felt a primal fear that their species hadn't experienced since they were prey animals on their homeworld millions of years ago. Your government has been given multiple opportunities to end this conflict peacefully. They have been offered terms that would allow the Empire to maintain its core territories while granting independence to the species you have enslaved. These offers have been rejected. The display changed one final time, showing tactical readouts that made it clear just how completely human forces had penetrated Imperial space. Strike forces were positioned throughout the galaxy, ready to simultaneously destroy every major Imperial installation within hours. Therefore, the United Earth Defense Force is implementing what we call the Exodus Protocol. You have 72 hours to begin the complete withdrawal of all Imperial forces from the territories of non-Corathian species. Any Imperial military unit that remains in occupied territory after that deadline will be considered a hostile force and dealt with accordingly. Korthnix stared at the displays in horror. The scope of human preparation was beyond anything he had imagined possible. They hadn't just been fighting a guerrilla campaign. They had been positioning forces for a simultaneous strike against every Imperial installation in the galaxy. To the enslaved populations throughout Imperial space, liberation fleets are already en route to your worlds. Freedom is coming. To the free species of the galaxy, humanity offers alliance, trade, and mutual protection against any who would threaten your independence. Chen's expression softened slightly as she delivered her final message. To the citizens of Corathia, we do not wish to destroy your civilization. We wish to offer you the chance to join the galactic community as equals rather than conquerors. Your technology, your knowledge, your culture, all of these things have value beyond their utility as tools of domination. The transmission began to fade, but Chen's final words carried across the galaxy with perfect clarity. The galaxy tried to warn you about humanity. They told you not to wake us, not to threaten our young, not to mistake our love of peace for an inability to wage war. You ignored those warnings, and now you face the consequences. But even now, it's not too late to choose a different path. The screens went dark, leaving the Imperial Command Center in stunned silence. For several minutes, no one spoke. The implications of what they had witnessed were too enormous to process immediately. The humans hadn't just infiltrated Corathia Prime. They had demonstrated that they could reach anywhere in Imperial space at any time, without being detected until they chose to reveal themselves. "Sir," his aide finally whispered, "what are your orders?" Korthnix stared at the dark screens, understanding that the 3-millennium reign of the Corathian Empire had just come to an end. The humans had achieved victory not through superior firepower or larger fleets, but through superior understanding of the principles that govern galactic civilization. They had proven that cooperation was more powerful than domination, that innovation born of necessity could surpass technology developed through conquest, and, most importantly, that no empire built on oppression could survive when its victims learned to fight back effectively. "Signal all Imperial fleets," he said finally. "Begin immediate withdrawal to core Corathian territories. Authorize all occupied worlds to negotiate their independence." His aide stared at him in shock. "Sir, you're ordering the dissolution of the Empire?" Korthnix looked up at the dark screens where Admiral Chen's face had been moments before. No, the humans just ordered the dissolution of the Empire. I'm simply acknowledging reality. Throughout the galaxy, the message had been received and understood. The Korathian Empire, which had ruled through fear and technological superiority for 3,000 years, had been defeated by a species that understood something the Korathians had forgotten. The strongest civilizations were built not on the domination of others, but on the principles of cooperation, innovation, and the unshakable belief that all sapient beings deserve to be free. The age of empire was over. The age of alliance had begun, and at the center of it all, humanity had taken its place not as conquerors, but as guardians of a principle that the galaxy had almost forgotten, that the measure of a civilization's greatness lay not in the worlds it could conquer, but in the lives it chose to protect. The galaxy had tried to warn the Empire about humanity. Now it would learn what humanity had been trying to warn the galaxy about all along, that peace, justice, and freedom were not weaknesses to be exploited, but forces powerful enough to reshape the stars themselves. The war was over. The real work of building a better galaxy was just beginning.